You see it?
Okay.
That's
Okay.
your to the.
Oh, okay.
So I did -3 to the second power. And then for the next one, I'm gonna do parentheses, -3, parentheses, to the second power. If you do not type it exactly like it's written, you are probably going to get the wrong answer. Just say. You move
I
Sam.
got,
Okay. Let's see
I got
what it is.
the top one -9, but
This
and
one
then
is-
the second one, I got -9 too, what I do wrong?
No, you did
Hold
something
on.
wrong.
Let me calm down, so. Okay,
Ms. Cooper,
yes,
I'm just getting here.
okay.
Oh, I
We
see
got all
now.
four
I
in
put the
Mullins, and we
two
have
on
all
the
three
Yeah,
in.
You got to put it on the outside.
Yeah.
Okay, we got all four in Mullins. We have all three in Lake City, and we have both in Hartsville, so I am good to go. Okay, in 16, you should have done -3 to the second. That gave you the -9. For part B, you have to put that -3 in parentheses.
I put the 2 on the
No, the-
inside. No.
You can't
Yeah.
put
It's on the outside.
Yeah.
It's got to be written exactly like you see it, or it's gonna be wrong.
Mhm.
So that one's going to be a +9. If you put it on the inside, it means something totally different.
Mhm.
All right, so now these are gonna be very similar, just getting you used to typing them in. All you're doing is typing them exactly like you see them. And on your test, you're gonna wanna tell me, but Miss Cooper, I had it, I just had the wrong sign. Wrong sign means it's wrong. There's a big difference between making a deposit and making a withdrawal. The answer to both of these is gonna be -128. And remember, they will give you a calculator. You will never go without a calculator in this class. All right, number 21, we have fractions. Ooh, yes.
For the, what kind of calculators?
They will give you the calculators like I'm using up here.
Okay,
They will give you these calculators.
okay.
But it won't be that same color.
It will be, they're
Yeah.
yellow. They're just like, they're the TI-83s or the TI-84s. They just are bright yellow. They look like, they're like this color.
Yeah.
They're
That's
bright
one
yellow.
you- Yeah, that's one you keep.
Okay, see, mate, you need a bar calculator?
Yeah.
Will you come up here and get one? I'm too fat to walk around. I did. All right. Now, for the next one, because they gave you fractional problems, that means they want a fractional answer. So it's gonna be negative parentheses, 1 divided by 2, close it into the second. Now, y'all, we use to the second so much, you can either do to the second, or there is a button, because in math we use to the second so much, there is a button right here. It's diagonally above the 7. That button is to the second.
Mhm.
So if you're doing to the second, you can just hit that button, and that button just does to the second. So either way, it doesn't matter to me if you want to do to the second or if you want to do to the second. It's going to give you the same answer. Now, because it's a fraction, they want you to do math inner, because they want a fractional answer. So, what, baby? That's the first answer. I haven't done the
I
second one.
did, but it gave me an error.
That means you screwed up.
I
So
got,
go down to go to. Was it a stupid error? Did it say syntax?
I did the same thing I did, -1.
You know what you probably did? You probably didn't do the negative, you did a minus, a
No, I
subtraction.
did the negative.
Okay, so when you get that syntax error, you need to go down to go to, which is number 2, and you need to say, tell me what I'm doing wrong, and it will highlight what it doesn't like. So the answer for 21 part A is -1/4. And the answer to 21 part B is +1/4. Did you figure out what you're doing wrong?
Yeah.
let me know if you're not getting these answers. But these are mainly plug and chug. Making sure you know how to plug it into the calculator. Number 24, we are doing 2012 to the first power. And we are doing 1 to the 2012th power. So the answer to the first one is 2012. The answer to the second one is 1. Cool? Alright. Now, I'm going to show you how to do these. Let me look at your formula sheet for a second. I don't know if your formula sheet has this or not. If it doesn't, I'll show it to you anyway. Formula sheet. Okay, we do have it on here. Okay. There's some, on the second page of your formula sheet, you will always be given this formula sheet. Under handouts and study sheets, which is where I give you the notes and what you need to know for the test, at the very bottom, it says formula sheet. And your formula sheet is 2 pages, and we really haven't done anything off this formula sheet yet, but what I'm talking about right now is the bottom of the second page. And I want to go over some of these formulas because some of these are really nice to know, especially if your calculator is acting up. And sometimes your calculator will act up, so I want to talk about some of these properties. Let's go over, and you don't have to memorize these, you just have to know when to use them and how to use them. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, and I'm going to add a 6th property on here just so that we can have it. There's 6 properties that you need to know, and it's on your formula sheet that will make your life easy. And I'm going to talk about each of these 6 properties. The first one says a to the m times a to the n equals a to the m plus n. And I know it's a little bit fuzzy, so I'm going to write it out. It says a to the m times a to the n equals a to the m plus n. Now, what that property means, and I'm going to explain each one of them. What that property means is if I have x to the 3rd power times x to the 2nd power, then my answer would be x to the 3 plus 2 or x to the 5th power. So if you're multiplying and your bases are the same, you add the exponents. Now, I'm not one to keep up with rules. I hate to memorize rules. So if I gave you a problem that says x to the 3 times x to the 2, y'all, what does x to the 3rd mean? How many x's do you have?
3.
You have 3 x's. What does x to the 2nd mean?
2 x's.
You have 2 x's. So how many total x's do you have?
6.
So you have 3 x's and you have 2 x's. So what did I really do? I counted the x's. Or I added the exponents. That's what that rule says. Y'all with me? Now, for rule number 2, the rule says a to the m over a to the n means a to the m minus n. So if you're dividing, it tells you to subtract the exponents. So if I have x to the 5th over x to the 3rd, how many x's do I have upstairs? 5. How many x's do I have downstairs? 3. Now, let me remind you of something that we even talked about, I think, on Monday. What is 7 over 7? 1. It cancels out, right? So what should happen to this x over x? And what should happen to the next x over x? And what should happen to the next x over x? So how many x's am I left with? 2. So my final answer should be x to the 2nd. And what did I really do? I subtracted the 2 exponents. I did x to the 5 minus 3 and got the same thing. That's what that property says. Now, the third property says if you have exponents side by side, then you're gonna multiply them. So the third property says if we have a to the m raised to the n, then you multiply those properties together.
Because they're parentheses.
Because there's parentheses, and parentheses we know in math means multiplication. So for this one, it says if I have a to the second and I raise it to the fourth, that means, do you agree that I am fourthing what's in parentheses? So I am doing a to the second times a to the second times a to the second times a to the second because the fourth power told me to do it 4 times. Well, a to the second means a times a. This means a times a. This means a times a. And this means a times a. So how many total a's do I have? 8. Which is really 2 times 4. Okay? Now, property number 4 says, an exponent to me is like an attitude. If your attitude is negative, you make it, like if you're in a 2-story house and you have a negative attitude, you go to the other floor to get happy. So this is understood to be over 1. So this A is pissed off. So to make him happy, he goes downstairs. So this is going to be 1 over a to the m. So it doesn't change the person, it just changes his attitude. So it's not changing the A, it's just changing his attitude, it's changing the m. So if I give you an example, I'm just going to put a bunch of them in here. I do x to the third, y to the negative 2, m to the negative 4. Tell me about x. Is he happy or is he mad? He's happy. So we let him be. He stays where he is because he's happy. Tell me about the y.
Sad.
He's sad. He's pissed off. So where does he need to go?
To the bottom.
To the bottom. And when he comes to the bottom, his exponent becomes positive. Tell me about the m to the negative 4.
He's sad.
He's sad. So where should he go?
To the bottom.
He's already on the bottom.
You go to the top.
So he goes to the top. And what does he become on the top?
Positive.
A positive. Now that everybody's happy, we're done. We don't like negative exponents. We don't like pissed off people. Just like last time, we didn't like those radicals in the bottom. We didn't like those square roots downstairs. We don't like negative exponents. Okay? So that's what rule number 4 talks about. Rule number 5 and 6 are pretty easy. Rule number 5 says that anything to the 0 power is 1. It's one of those rules that don't make sense. You just got to suck it up and learn it. 7 to the 0 power is 1. 5 to the 0 power is 1. 157 to the 0 power is 1. It's like on Cinderella. At midnight, everything turned into a pumpkin. Everything to the 0 power is going to turn into a 1 magically. If you don't believe me, I can come over here and say 7 to the 0 power is 1. 157 to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the 0 power is going to be 1. That's just a mathematical rule. Now, my last rule says that anything, let me use the rule first. My last rule says that anything to the first power is itself. Anything to the first power is itself. Just like if something didn't have a number in front of it, it's understood to be a 1. If something doesn't have an exponent, it's understood to be a 1. So 9 to the first power is 9. 15 to the first power is 15. And that one you can also type into your calculator. 15 to the first power is 15. Anything to the first power is itself. So those are the rules that we're going to kind of be using. And the calculator can help us a good bit, but sometimes we can get in trouble. So I'm gonna show you both ways. And you have these properties on your formula sheet. I just wanna make sure you understand them and know how to use them.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, whenever we take a test and everything, can we use our formula sheet?
Yes, that whether you take it in Florence, and this is why I want to educate you, because Florence is really good about it, but Hartsville, Lake City, and Mullins, and this is why I gave you my cell phone. I had somebody in one of my online classes yesterday try to go to one of the off-campus sites and take a test, and I have already given the passwords to the site directors at Florence, Hartsville, Lake City, and Mullins, and said, this is the password. They can use a calculator and they can use a formula sheet. You provide the calculator, the formula sheet, and the scratch paper. Well, Hartsville, Lake City, and Mullins sometimes don't have a calculator to provide. Florence always does. And I got a call from one of the sites last night saying, I don't have your password sheet. And I'm like, I know you do. I sent it to you. I can resend it. So that's why I give y'all my cell phone. We do that remind thing. Because if you get down there and you have a problem, it's easier for y'all to get in touch with me than for them to get in touch with me. And I want y'all to be educated and say, hey, I know I can have a formula sheet. I know I can have a cell phone. I mean, not cell phone. Woo, no, you can't have a cell phone. I know I can have a formula sheet. I know I can have a calculator on every test. So whether you need the formula sheet or not, you will be given a formula sheet. You will be given a calculator unless you're an off-campus site, and they'll let you know whether you need to bring your own.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they have one, we don't need a print.
No, you don't need to print it. They will give it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, for the off-campus sites, I put it on the email so that they can print it and have it ready. For Florence site, they have them in a folder, and all you have to do is walk in and give them my name, and they'll give it to you. Good question. All right, so now when I come down to these, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do it. Let me move these down so that, because some of y'all will get confused when you're doing these in your calculator. Now, using our rules that we just talked about, do you see that these two bases are the same?
Yeah.
So this is like saying x to the third power times x to the first power. Y'all with me? So what is that going to be? X to the fourth power. Well, instead of x, it's going to be a 2 to the
Third, fourth.
because remember that's an understood 1. You with me? Now, they want us to evaluate it, so they want us to work it out completely. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what is 2 to the fourth power, 16. Now, for this one, you can do it in your calculator sometimes. I just want to make sure you have a backup plan. It's going to be 2 to the third power. Now, be careful, y'all. If your exponents take you up there to exponent land in the sky, you have to jump off the airplane. Because I have so many of you who will keep typing right now. Look what I'm doing. I'm way up here. So what you have to do is you have to do, oops, let me get out of here. You have to do 2 to the third, and you're up here in exponent land. You have to hit this over arrow to jump off the airplane. Choo! Now you're back on the ground. Times 2. Now, even though your calculator may not do that now, you may get into the testing room and your calculator may be like that, so be careful. So this one actually gave you the answer, as long as you know how to type it in and you know what you're doing. So the answer to that first one is 16. We good?
Yeah.
Now, for the next one, how would I type that in? Parentheses, -2 parentheses, to the third, jump off the airplane, times, parentheses, -2 parentheses. The answer to that one happened to also be 16. Now, if I did this one the rule way, see how my bases are the same? It would be x to the third times x to the first, which is still x to the fourth, but pay attention to what my base was this time. What was my base?
2.
What was my base in this part B?
Oh, parentheses.
parentheses -2. So this one's gonna be 16, and if I did -2 in parentheses to the fourth, that would also give me 16. Alright. Now, for this one, we're gonna do it in our calculator, but let's do it also using our rules. For this first one, do you see that our bases are the same? What is my base gonna be? 4. So we have, and I'm just gonna use x. X to the 5th over x to the 2nd. That means we have 5 x's in the top and 2 x's in the bottom. So how many x's are we left with?
3.
So my answer is going to be x to the 3rd, but instead of x, what do we put in place of x?
4.
4 to the 3rd. You with me? And we'll clean that up in just a minute. The next one is the same thing. We still have the same problem. We have x to the 5th over x to the 2nd, but in this case, what is our x? -4 to the 3rd. So if we were doing part A, we would do 4 to the 3rd, and if we were doing part B, we would do -4 to the 3rd. So the answer to the first one, really? Hold on, it's going crazy on me. Or I'm going crazy on me. There we go. So the answer to the first one is going to be 64. The answer to the next one is going to be 64. Now, we can actually do this one in our calculator by doing 4 to the 5th, jump off the airplane, divided by 4 to the 2nd, jump off the airplane, and we get our first answer. Parentheses, -4, parentheses to the 5th, jump off the airplane, divided by parentheses, -4, parentheses to the 2nd. You've just got to be very careful on how you type it in. So I don't want you freaking out on me on a test going, oh my gosh, it's not working out in my calculator. What do I need to do? I want you to have that backup step. Now, what did I tell you that anything raised to the 0 power was going to be?
0 and 1.
Anything raised to the 0 power is going to be 1. So do you see that the 0 is attached to those parentheses? So that answer is going to be 1. Now, for part B,
-1.
the 0 is only attached to the parentheses. This is riding dirty out front. So this piece turns to a 1, and that is riding dirty out front. You see the difference? Let me clone so that we can do it in the calculator. So if we type this in the calculator exactly like it's written, it's going to be parentheses, -6, parentheses to the 0. And then the next one's going to be negative parentheses, -6, parentheses to the 0. So the first answer is 1, the second answer is -1. Now, the reason I've taught you these rules is because when you get to number 32, you are screwed because it has an X in it. You cannot do that one in your calculator. You get an error. So, if I have for part A, -6 x to the 0, and for part B, I have parentheses, -6 and parentheses to the 0. What do you think part A is going to be?
1.
I hear undefined, I hear -1, I hear 1.
What, does X be a 1 or?
You have to look at what what your 0 is physically touching. Because it's like Cinderella. Your 0, your exponent is only physically touching that. So that is the only thing that is going to turn into a 1.
Okay.
So that is the only thing that's gonna turn into a 1. That -6 is still there, and it's multiplication because they were written side by side. So your answer is gonna be -6.
That's what I'm working on. Yes, and
Yeah. So when I say it turns into a 1, the 0 makes it turn into a 1, it only makes it turn into what it's physically touching. So what is part B? What is the 0 physically touching?
the six.
The parentheses.
The parentheses. So the 0 is physically touching the parentheses, which means all of that is gonna turn into a 1. So when you do these, you have to ask yourself, what is it physically touching? That is what's gonna turn into a 1.
So you don't put like X behind the 1 or?
Because the 0 turned that whole bad boy into a 1. So what if I gave you, -2, 3x to the 0?
Be -2 times 1.
No, it's touching that, it's touching the three. and
A -2.
It's, physical touching the three and the egg.
So the 0 is physically touching the
Egg, three and the egg.
the 3 and the x. So that means all of this is gonna turn into a 1.
So
Yeah.
-2.
So my answer is gonna be -2. You were right.
Okay.
I just couldn't say that. Does that make sense? I know, boo, those are tough. But I'd rather you know them now than know them later.
Can you do one that's not physically touching?
Okay, like what if I gave you, what if I gave you a -x to the 0?
Oh, yeah, -1.
Why is it -1?
Yes. Because the x is only physically touching the 0. So that means that is gonna turn into a 1, and that's right and dirty. Does that help?
Can you go up?
I can do whatever you
Okay,
want.
right there.
So like for these two right here, if I come back to these without using the calculator, this -6 in parentheses to the 0. Do you see that the 0 is physically touching the whole parentheses? That's why it's a 1. Where here, the 0 is physically touching that, so that is a 1 with a negative in front.
So anything to the 0 power, you said it's gonna be a 1, but except for like.
What's right and dirty out front.
Okay.
So see how right here, the -6 is in parentheses, so that is a 1. But this is technically not touching the 0. It's just hanging out front. It's not physically connected to the 0.
Okay, for the example where you had -2 right there.
This one,
Okay.
the parentheses are what's physically touching the 0. So everything in the parentheses turned to a 1. The -2 was not physically connected to the 0.
Okay.
Did that help? All right, now, for the next one. What do we think about number 34 besides skipping it? And what do we know about negative exponents?
Yeah, the mother.
Gotta change it to a fraction.
They're not happy.
No.
And how do we change non-happy fractions to happy fractions?
Flip it.
Flip it, turn it upside down. So this would be 1 over 5 to the first. And what about the next one?
Flip
And it would be,
2. 4
Neg-
over 2.
-4.
oh, help me,
It'll
Lord
be
Jesus.
4 over 2.
1/16.
1 over 2 to the 4th. Now, we can, Ron has already been working,
Yeah.
we can do these in our calculator. We can do 5 to the -1. And because they'll say, write it in simplest form, so we're gonna do math, enter. And 2 to the -4, and then math, enter